This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 295 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. We're talking about overnight train travel today. I can't believe it's been this long and I've never made an episode devoted to it because it's something I love doing. Before we begin, I'll just like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today on a very wintry, rainy, windy day. Hopefully it's not too noisy as you're listening. So, back to overnight train travel. I absolutely love overnight trains. I have spent quite a few nights sleeping on trains across Russia when I rode the Trans-Siberian Railway. I've spent a night on a train going up to Lapland in Finland. Spent many nights and quite some long days because these trains were always slow in Vietnam, going up the coast of the poorly named Reunification Express. Didn't feel very express, but sleeping on trains is something I really love. I love that feeling of that, or the kind of the sensation of rocking. Maybe it's like a cradle-like feeling, and I love arriving in the middle of the city. It's just, I don't know, it really appeals to me, and I have enjoyed every time I've done it. On top of that, it's an extra good thing these days because it's also much more sustainable. You might have seen the new French law, which just came into action a couple of weeks ago, May 2023, about short plane flights being replaced by trains. So in other words, if you can take the journey in less than 2.5 hours by train, then that flight can no longer exist. So there's a few conditions, like you need to be able to easily go there and back in a day for business people, etc. So it's not perfect, but it's a great precedent to say, hey, when we can, let's take a train. And that's exactly what my first guest was thinking when he was recently planning a trip to Thailand. So let's hear from Justin Meneguzzi about his experience of overnight train travel in Thailand.
Earlier this year, I was in Thailand working on a few stories, and while I was plotting out my itinerary, I guess, on the map, I was wanting to go to Bangkok. Start in Bangkok, which is, kind of makes a lot of sense, given it's the capital. And then also I needed to head up into the mountains of northern Thailand, Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, that kind of area. And being Australian, we're very used to getting on a plane and going to Sydney or somewhere close by, mainly because it's the main way that we need to get around, given the vast distances in Australia and usually the lack of services. But in Thailand, they have a lot of train services with a really good train network across Thailand. One of the earlier kings had made sure to invest a lot of money into building those train tracks to really open up the country to train travel. And actually stayed in a hotel that was completely made out of trains, or part of it was made out of trains, in honour of that history. So they definitely have an established history and appreciation for train travel. And so while I was, plotting out my trip, I found that there was an option for a 1-hour flight from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, which, doing a bit of research, I found that would produce about nearly 70 kilos of carbon to produce that per passenger, so for myself. But then I also saw there was an overnight train option from Bangkok to Chiang Mai as well. And that was significantly less. That was about a third of the carbon emissions compared to the plane. So naturally, I thought, okay, well, that's a better way for me to do it in terms of reducing my own impact. But also, I've done overnight trains before in Vietnam and also from Scotland into London. And they can be a really cool experience as well. You often get to see things that a lot of people wouldn't get to see. There's something quite special about rolling out at sunset in one city and then waking up at sunrise in another city. And in between those moments, you're surrounded by other people. To what extent depends on your budget.
Good point.
But it's a good opportunity to meet other people too. And I've met some really interesting people. I once met a man from Dubai who was telling me about his 4 wives and how they all live in one house and how they manage all that. And my partner and I were just like kind of gobsmacked by that interaction. So pretty wild, the people you meet, hey?
Yeah. And you have time to talk to them when you're on a train, don't you? That's the thing. You know,
Exactly.
You're all comfortably sitting around and you have a chat.
Exactly right. And I guess those earlier train trips I've done weren't on my own. I did it on my own, but doing it really, really cheap on a backpacking budget, and I just kind of doing things as cheap as possible in terms of food and that kind of stuff. Or I was being hosted as part of a tour, in which case they handled the logistics for me. So this is the first time in a long time I've actually had to do it myself. And I was just a bit concerned about, traveling in Asia sometimes it's difficult to find authoritative websites that you can trust. So there's that concern. I wasn't sure about, what the food would be like, what the facilities would be like. I guess the booking it was the easiest thing. I booked via a website called 12Go Asia, and you can book a lot of things through them. You can book buses, you can book trains, tours, I think, as well. They came pretty highly recommended, so I gave them a go, and they were great. They basically act as an agent for you, and they go buy the ticket on your behalf at the station, and then you can either get it mailed to you or you can collect it at their office in Thailand. They're not just in Thailand, I think they're across other parts of Asia as well. So that was super easy to do that. So got my ticket, I guess, from Bangkok to Chiang Mai. So I turned up at the new station in Bangkok, which is the Bang Sue Grand Station. And it's massive. It's like a big, shiny, I guess, airport with nothing inside it yet. It's quite vast and empty. And I was a little bit worried because I got dropped off there at midday and my train wasn't until 5 or 6. So I was a little bit worried about how I was going to pass the time, where I was going to get food. But they had a little food court inside as well. You could eat some food there, do whatever you need to do. So I stocked up on food at the market because I assumed that there would be no food on the actual train itself. So I got on the train. No, one of the first things that happened, I was given a menu. So they had 8 different meal kit options that you could choose from, and it wasn't very expensive. I think it was about $9 for one of the kits, which included so I got had a curry, had some fruit, had some spring rolls, had a bit of a weird looking soup attached to it, which, it's not the best meal you're ever going to have in your life, but
but it's convenient.
It's convenient, and it's actually better than airline food. That's fine. You basically, you got your seat. I had a second class ticket. So what that got me was a configuration of 4. So it's me looking at someone else, then the aisle, and then there's 2 people across the aisle. Right. But I kind of won the lottery and that no one else was in those seats.
Brilliant.
I was the only configuration where I had it all to myself. So there's no one opposite me. So it's really, they're kind of wide, comfortably, I'm a pretty wide person, so comfortably wide seats. And then you're sitting down for like an hour, and then an attendant comes and converts it all into beds. So you go from a seat into a bench bed, and they're like ninja fast. Like they're so fast in terms of like how it all flat packs together, and then the pillows come out and the curtains come out. It's all very impressive how they do it. So 5 minutes, you've got a bed, and you have a little privacy curtain. Gives you privacy, pretty self-explanatory. And so it was a little bit short for me. I'm 6 foot, but it's very comfortable. And as I said, you're kind of looking out the window as the sun sets, Bangkok starting to light up in the major metropolis that it is, and you're rolling out. That's pretty cool. You just settle in with a magazine and a podcast or a movie, and it's pretty easy. A lot of people did ask me about bathroom facilities, so they were shared, they were communal, but they were exceptionally clean.
Awesome.
There was a shower as well, so some people might want to have a shower, so that is there as an option too. So that was my experience in second class, but on the way back from Chiang Mai back to Bangkok, I splurged by $20 and I bought a first class ticket. And that was similar in a lot of ways in terms of you're sharing a bathroom, but I had a whole enclosed cabin to myself with a door.
Right.
So I was misleading to say it was to myself. I was sharing it with one other person.
Right.
And he was on the top bunk. I was on the bottom bunk. Be interested to know if your viewers prefer top or bottom. I think a lot of people tend to go for bottom, but in that
a train, yes.
So we had like We both had our own private TV. We had a little wash basin.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. We had a door that closed. Like I said, there was a lot more kind of
Yeah, it's
private.
nice. And if you're traveling with a friend or partner, then you've got that whole thing just for you guys. So
Yeah, exactly. Or if you win the lottery and no one books us here to that.
exactly. Yeah, that's right. Did you sleep well on the train?
Yeah, I did. I think in the second class carriage, the lights are kept on all night. So if you're a light sleeper, it's important that you take an eye mask, take some earplugs, all the things that you would take with you for an overnight plane. But in first class, you have your own light. You just turn off the light. And it's pretty easy. I slept fine. Actually, like this is why I like overnight trains. Like you don't have to worry about it's almost a free night of accommodation. So
Absolutely.
you're making a saving there because the tickets were only like between second class and first class. I think it was between $50 and $80 Australian.
Wow.
So it's very cheap in terms of you get from A to B. You get a very cheap meal on board. It does it's good. Does the job. It's pretty relaxed. You get a free night's accommodation.
Win-win.
You might meet some cool people along the way too.
Yeah. And you have impacted the environment less.
Of course, yeah. So it produces less emissions than a plane would, which is a big win too.
Well, great to hear about Justin's recent experiences with overnight train travel in Thailand. I have only ever used internal flights to get to the more distant parts of Thailand from Bangkok, and I don't know why it never occurred to me to check out what their rail system was like. So next time, that is definitely how I'm going to do it. And I will leave a link in the show notes to that booking website that Justin recommended as well, 12Go Asia. Maybe it's 12Go Asia. I'm not sure. But in any case, I will leave a link for it. Now, my next guest is Julie Kaplan. And Julie just recently spent 4 months exploring Iraq, of all places, like a very intriguing destination. And I've got quite a few excerpts from our chat to share in future episodes. But one thing she did there was take her first fully overnight train, and I asked her to tell me about it.
I am a lover of public transport, a lover of trains, and there's a train in Iraq that is the Baghdad to Basra overnight train. And this is from the capital of Baghdad to a city in the southernmost part of the country. I love trains, but I hadn't ever spent a full night on an overnight train before in my travels. So it was an exciting first experience. So I went to the train station. I believe that train only happens a few times a week. So I believe it was a Monday evening at, I want to say 7 or 8 p.m. I buy the ticket, I get on the train, and I'm in a sleeper car. There is 3 other beds, so 4 beds in total. I decided to be in an all-women cabin, and so the train departs at 8 p.m. and then arrives at 4 in the morning in the south. My favorite part of this train ride wasn't the ride itself, which it was dark. So when you looked out the windows, there was a whole lot of dark blue and black, but a lot of darkness. But the woman in my train cabin, I grew to adore, and her name is Amira, and she did not speak a lick of English, and at that time, my Arabic, I always say, is shway, more or less, not very good, but through body language and through a little bit of Google Translate and through showing pictures of our families, I really got to know this woman. And it was one of the first experiences in my life when I realized you could form a genuine connection with somebody who does not speak the same language as you. And what was really special is I was set to meet a mutual friend of mine in Basra that afternoon. And I had planned on just hanging out in the train station from 4 in the morning until 2 or 3 p.m. But Amira very overwhelmingly welcomed me and invited me to go stay with her family for that middle time when I didn't have anywhere to stay. We arrive, and then her husband and her sons, they only expect to pick her up, and I'm with her.
Suddenly,
and they greet me with open arms, and I go to their house, and first I take a really long nap because I didn't get very much sleep because I was hanging out with Amira the whole time. And then I had a great nap, and we woke up and shared breakfast. And it was just a great reminder that one of the big advantages of public transport is the people getting to meet people. Mm-hmm. I've spent more than my fair share in private cars or in taxis, but it was really, really special to take public transport. There was, on the train, there's a little cafe, and let me tell you, Iraq has some of the best orange juice in the world. And this train had so much orange juice, and I'm an orange juice girly. I love it. So I had at least 11 little kind of cups of orange juice. So that was my favorite part of the train besides Amira. But that's the story of the Baghdad to Basra overnight train. I would recommend. I had a great time. Did not sleep very much. So if you're looking for a fruitful night of sleep, it was a bit of a bumpy road. But other than that, I had a great time.
That sounds fabulous. The friendliness of the people there sounds almost overwhelming. I guess, is it partly because there's so few tourists?
I think that I would agree. I think that in countries that, at least in my personal experience, countries that don't have very many tourists tend to be really, they tend to be really, really welcoming towards them. And I think what makes Iraq unique is that Iraqis are aware of the perception that outsiders might have of their country. They know that Iraq does not have the best reputation in the media. Pretty much any person that I met who welcomed me with kindness, they would always ask at the end of my time with them or hanging out with them, they would say when I would offer payment or any type of kind of way to thank people, every single Iraqi, what they would say was, just tell your friends at home that we're not our government, we're not the groups in power, we're not what the news says, we're just people. And we're not that different from you, Julian. We promise we're not that different from your friends.
I did lead Julie down a bit of a non-train tangent there, but I promise it's just a preview of some of the future discussions you'll hear from her trip to Iraq. Now, my final guest today is Imogen Lepere, and she also has some experience meeting people while she's travelling on overnight trains, but the story she tells takes place in Russia on the Trans-Mongolian.
My big overnight train travel trip happened in 2017, and it was the Trans-Mongolian Railway, which goes from Moscow to Beijing via Mongolia, which is a journey of nearly 5,000 miles that crosses 7 time zones. And it was one I'd always wanted to do. At the time, I was working full-time at a magazine in London, and I negotiated with my editor for a 2-month sabbatical. Nice. And he very kindly let me go for it. And I did this trip with my boyfriend at the time, who was a photographer. And it was my very first freelance commission, and it's kind of how I got into being a freelance travel writer. So it has a very special place in my heart for that reason. But more than that, it's just a very strange trip. I think I was only 25. I was not a very seasoned traveller. I was probably a lot less culturally sensitive, a lot less well-informed. One of the first places, our first kind of journey from Moscow, it was a 2-day, 2-night journey, and we were headed to a town in Siberia called Omsk. And we'd opted for the second class carriage, which is 4 bunks. In a tiny space. I mean, there really are, if you're lying on one bunk, you can reach out and touch the ones over the other side of the carriage. That seemed like a safer, nicer option than the regular carriages, which were 26 bunks, just having 4. But in retrospect, this was actually not the case, because as we discovered over the coming weeks, the women and the children and the families travel in the 3rd class normal carriages. The 2nd class tended to be for men on business trips, often long-haul truckers who delivered a truck to Moscow and were heading back into Siberia and kind of wanted to celebrate the long drive with a lot of vodka.
Oh dear.
So, yeah, this initial 48 hours was initially just me and my boyfriend for about an hour, and it was all very romantic, and we had our Dostoevsky novels. And then very soon these 2 truck drivers came in. I think they were called Ivan and Alexander. Neither spoke a word of English. We didn't speak any Russian. I mean, they were they were very big guys. Yeah, we definitely culturally didn't have much common ground at all. And yeah, as soon as they came in, they both started kind of staring at me and touching me, like stroking my hair and winking at me. And my little 25-year-old boyfriend is hardly going to try and stand up to them.
No.
And so we were feeling quite uncomfortable, and we were in this kind of, honestly, carriage that was, well, I'm not very good at meters, but about 1 meter squared it felt. And we just didn't know what to do. Luckily, we had, in true Russian spirit, bought a litre of vodka for the train. And so we kind of cracked it open and offered them some. It was only 8 a.m. in the morning.
I don't think they mind.
But we figured, no, and we figured that when language fails, vodka is, and drinking and the camaraderie that comes from boozing is a universal language. And so, yeah, we kind of offered them a glass of vodka and thought that would be it. But it turns out that Russians, they drink, if you open a bottle of vodka, you don't just have one, you drink the entire bottle. And you go round the circle doing shots until the whole bottle's finished.
At 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. And yeah, so we ended up getting absolutely roaring drunk with these guys. Like really. And they had loads of their own vodka as well. And so the next kind of 48 hours just passed in this weird, drunken and hungover blur. And it was kind of punctuated by, you weren't meant to smoke on the train, but we would sneak into the bit in between carriages and smoke cigarettes together. And then, yeah, it was punctuated by these beautiful sunrises over the plains of Siberia, huge skies, and these little tiny wooden villages. And sometimes you'd see snatches that really looked like they could have been any time within the last 200 years. I remember seeing a little old woman with a headscarf tied around her head and a basket filled with mushrooms and that kind of thing.
Perfect. Yeah.
And then we arrived in Omsk, said goodbye to our friends, quite gladly by this point.
Yeah. I could relate well to Imogen's story. I also had some interesting cabin mates on my journey across Russia on the Trans-Siberian. And I don't know, maybe this was a very lucky thing. I happened to be on some antibiotics during that journey, and they were the kind that you're strictly not allowed to mix with alcohol. So there was no vodka brought out to share with my cabin mates, and that probably saved me, I don't know. One day I'll have to do it again and find out. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to episode 295 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope that if you haven't taken an overnight train journey before, this might inspire you to seek one out next time you are somewhere where this would work out. Huge thanks to my guests. Started off with Justin Meneguzzi. You can find him at his website, justinmeneguzzi.com, and also that website he mentioned for booking transport in Asia, which he used with success. It's always good to know. And the website is 12go.asia. So 12go.asia. Looks actually very useful. I got quite deep in an exploration of that website. So yeah. Anyway, also I chatted with Julie Kaplan, and you can find more about her at juliekaplan.com. And she also has a really fabulous YouTube channel. It's called Julie from LA, where she's got some videos from her recent Iraq trip. Really, really well done, kind of documentary style, really worth a look. So do look her up. And last but definitely not least, I chatted with Imogen Lepere, and her website is imogenleperewriter.com. It was actually really funny. I had taken Imogen's book, The Ethical Traveller, out of my local library. It was literally next to my bed. I'd been having a browse through. It's a great book. Its subtitle is 100 Ways to Roam the World Without Ruining It. So you can tell it's right up my alley. But then Imogen, out of the blue, messaged me to say, can I come on the podcast? And I was like, yes, I have your book next to my bed. So it was lovely to speak to her. And if you're interested to hear more about the Trans-Siberian, then I actually have a whole episode about travelling on the Trans-Siberian across Russia, which is back at episode 194. So scroll back in your podcast player or head to notaballerina.com/194. Of course, don't forget about our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers and our LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. Just search for those or see the link in the show notes. For this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/295. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.